Well, hey guys, here's Jonathan. Welcome to our tour of the St. John's Little Church. So this is the little church you see across the street, and unless you guys come to the daily masses or been here for a wedding or something like that, you probably haven't seen the inside of it. So I'm going to start off by taking you on a little tour of the inside of the church here to kind of take a look at what it looks like, and then I'm going to do a bit of a tour and tell you a little bit about the history of it from the outside. Well guys, welcome inside the St. John's Little Church. So I've been wanting to show you this for a while, but it's really kind of hard to be able to come over here and do this because, it's across the street, and getting guys all over here is kind of a mammoth undertaking. We've done some tours of it before, but never really, probably with your group, I don't think we've gone over in here and done it. So this is by far one of my favorite churches. It's put in a Gothic architecture style, which means it has this long, sort of skinny design to it, with the tall walls on the side up into this big open area. And then when I go outside, I can show you more of what it looks like from the outside. But this is traditionally how a lot of small churches would have looked. One of my favorite churches that I grew up and really had a huge influence on me was a church very similar to this by my grandmother's house out in Canada in a place called Bornish. And this little tiny church is probably like a mirror image of this, and I'll see if maybe I can splice in a couple pictures of what it looks like in here. But it really, there's a whole generation of churches that look very, very similar to this that, came from the early 1900s, late 1800s, when this was the common style of church to build. So we have our pews right here. These are just regular wooden pews that actually are a little bit wider than they were originally. Before, these would have been much closer together, but when we redid the church here about 5-6 years ago, we moved them apart a little bit to give a little bit more space because people are a little bit more rotund now. I don't see any on here, but these used to have little hat holders. So the gentleman could come in here and put their hats up and hook them on here. You have the main altar right here, and then you have these two side altars. You have this one with a statue of Mary over here, and then over on this side you have one of Jesus. Now, in a lot of cathedrals and stuff like that, you'd have side altars that were much more common that you would have side masses at. So imagine a giant cathedral. You wouldn't necessarily want to have mass in the main part of the cathedral every single time. So you'd have these side altars so you could have like smaller daily masses in the side altars. Now, traditionally, this church would have had something called a communion rail that would have been from right here, right across to this side right here. And back during the old Latin Rite masses, to receive communion, you'd come up here and you'd actually kneel at that communion rail. You wouldn't process forward, and they would put the communion on your tongue, and then you return to your seat from there. Up here we see the altar, but this isn't traditionally how this would have been when this church was built. When the church was built, this would have been pushed all the way back here, and you would have had the high altar here in the back. And the priest would actually do the entire Mass facing towards this altar right here, with the congregation behind him doing the responses in Latin. And that's how this church would have probably, for the majority of its life, have been had its Mass celebrated. Then in the 1970s, we had something called Vatican II, and they did some updating to the Code of Canon Law in terms of how the Mass is celebrated. And so we have the Mass today that's celebrated in the vernacular, meaning that it's spoken in English and not in Latin. And in different countries, it can be spoken whatever the native language is of that country. And the priest turned around and faced the congregation. The congregation got to respond in the native language, and there's a lot more interaction going on as well. Fun fact that in each church, Catholic church, in the altar, there is a piece of a saint. So right here in the middle of this altar, they actually have the relic of a saint in here. Now, it's just a small relic, and we actually don't know what saint it is because there was a fire in St. John's many, many, many years ago, and the records of that were destroyed. So we don't know which saint it is, but there's actually in the altar here a special spot, and I'll see if I can show it here for you. I see right down there, there's a little concrete holder that's been sealed that has, I don't want to mess up Father's books or anything like that for when he does his masses each day. But it has a spot in there where it's sealed up with the relic of that saint. Another fun fact while we're here, I'm going to look up here. You see this stained glass window up there. And let's see if I can get you a nice zoom in of it up there. It's a little washed out, but that does not look like St. John. Who does it look like? My goodness, that looks like St. Patrick. And it is St. Patrick. So St. John's used to be connected with St. Patrick's Church in Brighton for a long time. We were not our own parish because we weren't large enough. This was a very rural community out here, lots of farmers. You didn't have a whole lot of families. You maybe had 40-ish families that came to church here, and that wasn't necessarily big enough to have its own parish. So we were connected with St. Pat's in Brighton. And when St. Pat's in Brighton was doing some renovations, so were we, and they ordered a new stained glass window for back here. They ordered one of St. Patrick and one of St. John's, but they weren't very careful when they installed it, and the St. Patrick one ended up over here, and the St. John one ended up over in the St. Pat's church. So we actually have a stained glass window of St. Patrick back here, but the one for St. John in the church at St. Pat's is long gone because they've since taken down that church, and they have the church that's up there now for St. Pat's. We also see this beautiful artwork back here. This has recently been redone. Within the last 8 years, they did a complete restoration of the inside of this church. So we had an artist come in and redo these paintings back here. So they look very vivid and strong. If you were here in the early 2000s, this would not look this good. It was very faded and did not look nearly as nice as you're seeing right here. Now over on this side right here, this is going to be the vestry where Father would get ready. So you'd come back here, and this would be where all of the different vestments are stored. So you see the different colors here for each of the different liturgical seasons. They would keep different items in here that you would use for Mass. You see right here the stuff for lighting the candles for Mass right here. The fire extinguisher in case there's a fire. And closets here where more of the robes could be held. And look, there's Jonathan. Hello, Jonathan. Nice to see you. Yeah. And then I like this part right here. There's a handy dandy little mirror. So Father could be back here and then kind of see who's here and when we're ready to start, and then kind of come back out here and could get started. So another kind of cool thing that we have in here are these Stations of the Cross. Now, I like the Stations of the Cross in our church, but these are traditionally like really cool stations right here. So you can see that they're statues, and they're very vivid and very powerful. I almost thought about doing our live Stations of the Cross based off these ones right here because they're just so magnificent. But, we have some really cool ones over at our church as well. These were donated in the early they were purchased in the early 1900s. So these are well over 100 years old, and they are been part of this church for a long, long time. The stained glass windows are the same deal. They are original to the church here. And something cool that you'd see in any of these old churches, if you go up to the stained glass windows, you'll see names written into the bottom part of the stained glass. So you see John and Alice Cullen. No, I'm sorry, Cullen. Not Gullen, it's Cullen. It's a C. Let's see. I think there's a couple. There's a few in particular I wanted to show you here. This one is Reverend Whitliff and Father Perrat. Okay, so let's go down here. There's particular ones I want to show you. Nor am I rambling here for a moment. This one is just pray for the donor right there. So that's not uncommon. Someone want to be anonymous. So basically the reason why the names are built into here is that these are the families that donated the money for the stained glass window. So they usually, you put your name in there as kind of a remembrance of that person, and so that you could pray for them. And I think that's kind of cool that, if you donated this, these people are well over 120, 150 years old. So they're long since dead, but their names are still here. So Cullen, you see that too. I wanted to show you that Cullen last name because these last ones over here are all Cullens as well. That's because you might have known Cullen Road. That's one of the early Catholic families that moved to this area that was very involved here with the church. The Bergens were another really important family when this church was first founded. So Bergen Road, if any of you guys live on Bergen Road or have been near that, you'll see the connection with that as well. A lot of cool statues in here. We've got the angels there in the background. And of course, we have the crucifix up here in the top. And I love this archway right here. If you ever go to St. Augustine's Catholic Church up in Deerfield, they have one very similar to this as well. So a couple of our youth groupers I know go to St. Augustine's. Now up here, you're going to see the choir loft up here. And this is traditionally where the choir would be at to sing because you put them up high so their voices can project out. So let's take a journey up there to see how you get there because this is one of my favorite parts of this church is the stairway. So a fun story about Jonathan. I grew up here at St. John's. I've gone here pretty much my entire life. And my mom used to take me to daily mass and stuff like that. And so we would come here for daily mass. I did my first confession actually over here at the little church in the little confessional here, and I'll give you guys a tour of that here in a little bit. But one of the things, let's see here. Hold on, guys. There we go. All right, so we'll head up here. My gimbal is giving me some trouble. I can remember coming up here as a little kid. We'd come up these stairs. All right, and today there's this gate that goes across here, but this didn't used to be here. And I always remember as a kid being nervous I was going to fall down this gap right here that goes in here between this and the stairway right there. The one at my grandmother's church I was telling you about earlier had a much larger gap than that, and that definitely still does not have did not have anything on it. So here's the choir loft up here. Some spots up here where the choir chairs could be and they could sing from. Another fun fact, you see these brown chairs back here? These used to be the pews at the other church that we have. We didn't have pews in the traditional sense. We had these plastic brown chairs that we would sit on. And so that we have tons of them left over around the church. Wow. Oh, and a breath from just a little bit walk up those stairs. That is very sad. So we got our speaker system up here for transmitting music. We have a full piano. And then we have an organ up here. We have lots of plastic flowers. Yeah, so lots of plastic flowers up over here. Here's our organ. Now, there's a good question here that you might be asking yourself right now, because look at this organ and look at this piano. All right, look at these items right here. They're pretty big, aren't they? Sorry, I'm still trying to get used to this gimbal. And it's not cooperating with me the way I would like it there. So this organ is huge. It's very, very heavy. Do you think there was any chance that we got it up this staircase? And your answer would be no, because we tried to. I was here for a part of it, but you could definitely not make it. Whoa. Sorry guys, this is my first practice run at making a video like this, and I totally messed that up. But you could not make it around that corner right there. It's just too sharp. So we had a parishioner who is also a retired engineer, and what he did was he actually built a freestanding stand that came up over this edge right here, from the floor down here, and then up. And we actually hoisted those up to this level and then slid it across. It was quite a remarkable piece of engineering that he was able to do to get these up here. And they since had to replace the organ twice. So this has actually happened a couple times. I was not part of the last couple ones, but there you go. It's a kind of a feat of engineering to get things up here. I don't think it was ever intended that you were going to have much more than maybe I'm not even sure a piano was ever planned on being up here. It was just more a cappella singing than anything else. So something else I want to show you may have noticed that at the front of this church, and you'll probably see it better on the outside, is that there's a bell tower. This is the door right here to the bell tower. Now, I want to show it to you real quick. I'm not sure. Hopefully, I am not going to get attacked because we've had a problem with bats in here before. So, let's see. Oh, yeah, there's a lot of droppings in here from the bats. Okay. So I'm basically going to put my camera up in here and pan you guys up so you can see. There's the bell tower. The outside window right there. And that takes you up to the attic space up there. Yeah, a little extra storage in here of a couple of random items. But yeah, very kind of messy. I wish I could describe you to the smell that's coming out of here because it's quite unpleasant. And unfortunately, you can't really see super well all the way up to the top there, but maybe a little bit there. You can see the kind of the raftering of where the original bell would have been up there, but there is no more bell up there. It was originally they would have been tied up there with rope, and as you can imagine, a heavy bell on rope over a long period of time would not work out too well. So I think they've removed the bell from this particular church. I'm sorry, let me give you a better view here while I'm trying to fix this door. Well, I'll be right back because I got to fix this door before I can continue. All right, back in business, door is fixed. It's just a little tricky sometimes. But yeah, you used to have a bell that you would go down here, and the altar boys would be in charge of ringing that bell, and I'll show you where that is here in just a moment. So let's go back down. Ooh, and here's another safety thing. There it is, wide open, right down there. Just fall right down that as a little kid. I remember that clearly. But this is a beautiful place. We still use it for daily masses. And we would, it's used for weddings and funerals and stuff like that. Sarah and I were going to have our wedding here, but it just was not going to be big enough for what we needed. I think the maximum is 150 comfortably, so you couldn't really do a whole lot more than that. All right, so I was going to show you guys the confessional. This is also the bride's room, where the bride would get ready. Not a whole lot of space up in here, as you can tell, but it's nice. It's for confessional. It doesn't work real well in terms of having privacy. Like you can't do the screen, but it works. This is where Jonathan did his first confession back with Father. I don't remember the priest's name that we had back then. I'd have to go back and look at it. And it's got this lovely wood paneling that is not original. That was probably added in the 70s. All right. So when you get to youth group tonight, I'm going to see if you guys have any questions here about the little church. I'm going to go outside here in a little bit and tell you a little bit about the history of it, and tell you a little bit about the families that lived around here and where the church came from. Because this is not actually the first church that was here. This is I think the third iteration of a church at this particular property. So let me close things down here, and I'll give you guys a tour of the outside as well. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed the inside of the church, so I want to give you a bit of a tour now of what the outside of the church here looks like. So this church goes all the way back to the 1830s when it was first founded. It's one of the earliest Catholic parishes, or Catholic communities, I should say, in Livingston County. I say Catholic community because it didn't really start off as a parish. There wasn't enough people here at the beginning to really make it into a full-fledged parish. So it started off as a community, and they only had a small log cabin to start with. In fact, the first settlers actually had this they'd have Mass in their homes until they could have enough time, enough money, or enough resources to actually build a log cabin, which would have been on this very site here where you see the church at today. Now, if we jump forward here to the about late 1860s, early 1870s, they start to work at making a more permanent church here. So as I go around here, I want to tell you a little bit about how they came about that and the different kind of iterations of this church. So as I mentioned before, this church is in the Gothic style, so it often has most of these Gothic style churches have a big bell tower at the front here that they use for calling people to service and afterwards. And as I was mentioning before, this church is not the original one that was built here. You see the 1991, that's actually the address of it here, but not when it was built. If we go around here to the side of the church, let's see, there used to be a keystone, but I don't remember exactly where that's at. But you look on the side here of the church, I'm hoping that you guys can see the difference here, is there is a change in the color of the brick pattern right about here. And on the left-hand side would have been the original church. On the right-hand side would have been the updated version of it. So the original church that was built here in the 1860s would have only gone up to where you see that change in the brick color right there. And then this was an extension done at about the turn of the century. I think it's about 1913, 1914 is when they did this addition onto the church right here to make it into what you saw it. I mean, even going back to the 1910s, about 110 years ago, this church was not very large. You're talking about maybe 50 to 60 families at max. This was still mainly a rural farming community. There would have been no homes up over here. There would have been all farmland across the street as well, like where the new church is over there, you can see it across the street, would have been all farms. And so you had a small community here. You had a priest who wouldn't necessarily be here every single weekend. And we were attached to St. Pat's in Brighton. So a lot of the official parish functions would have been over at St. Pat's in Brighton, and you would have to go over there for like things like religious education and, offices to get your baptismal forms and things like that. This is what we would call a mission parish, where they would do masses for the people out in this community so they wouldn't have to travel all the way to Brighton. Remember, you go back to the 1910s, people don't have cars. Cars are around, but they're a privileged few who have them. Most people are either walking or riding horses. And to go very far for Mass, it's going to be difficult. So the priest would actually come here for doing Masses for people because they wouldn't be able to travel very far. Eventually, St. John's is going to get its own priest. And in the 1960s and early 1970s, there's a push to make it into its own separate parish. And that happens, but there's another problem at the same time. There's a lot of people moving out to this community, and the size of this church is becoming an issue. It wasn't big enough. You have more and more families moving in here. Now, to give you some perspective, I said that there was about 60 to 70 families here at that time. Today, St. John's has over 1,000 families in it. And that growth happened in the last about 40 to 50 years. So you can imagine that growth is going to spur them to have to do something different. There was a time period in the 1970s, from about 1970 to about 1976, where they couldn't do masses here because it wasn't a large enough space for all the people in this community. They'd actually did them over at the old Heartland High School for a long time. My parents could even tell me stories about them having to go over there for Mass because there would not be enough room here in the little church for them to do that. Now, when you have a problem like that, you can't, you don't have enough room for all your congregants. You have to start talking about, okay, we need to build a new space, a new worship space. And that's where we see the first phase of this new St. John's Church across the street that you see here. So let me zoom in on this real quick here for you. So this building on this side of our church is actually the original church that was built in addition to this one right here. So, whatever you see in frame right here was the original church, and the space where we're at for youth group and for the religious ed classes is actually where the sanctuary was from the 1970s up to about 2000. In 2000, we put in another addition on the church because the parish had been growing so much, and that's where you get that portion of the church as well. So we've actually had like a couple different phases. Within the last 100 years, this parish has grown immensely. Now, right now, we're kind of in a period of decline because people just aren't going to church a whole lot. It doesn't matter what denomination you're part of. People are becoming much more secularized and not attending church. I think we peaked at almost 1,800 families, and we're down to about 1,000 right now. But it's also because there's been more parishes added. St. Mary Magdalene in Brighton didn't exist until the mid-90s. So they actually took St. Mary Magdalene in Brighton and kind of divided up some of the different parishioners from St. John's and St. Joe's and Howell and St. Pat's and Brighton, and kind of all divided them to go into that parish to help start that one up. And that one actually started off with masses over at Heartland High School as well, because they're kind of on that Heartland-Brighton border. Now, this is right here is the St. John's Cemetery, and I don't know if you've ever come over here. It's changed a lot just within the last year because they've had to put some additions on it. Everyone's been dying to get in here. Look at me, I made a joke in a cemetery. How grave of me. In any event, though, the St. John's Cemetery has gone through a couple different expansions because we've had a large parish, and it's, this older section right here was the most popular spot, and they've now extended it back beyond here into the section. This all, you came here just about a year ago, and this was all forest back here. And there was another section back over here to our left where they had an addition as well. So that's all cemetery right there. There's plots in there for people to purchase and have their loved ones. There's a couple different kind of grottos or prayer spaces right here. We see one right here in front of me. right there with the statue of Mary. And there's actually another one way back there in the back. That's for unborn children as well. So if you had a stillborn birth or died in delivery and stuff like that, they could be right there. But it's a very large cemetery, a very popular place to be interned. Catholic. This is actually not only St. John's only Catholic cemetery. If you were to go down Hacker Road, so not this way towards Brighton, but actually the opposite way past the new church, and you go down the dirt road part far enough, there's actually a spot where it curves. And once you get past the curve about a quarter of a mile, there's a cemetery that's kind of hidden up into the forest there. And it looks pretty creepy, actually, because we don't do a whole lot of maintenance on it anymore because it's back to some of the original families that lived here and very old headstones back there. I think we had a Eagle Scout project who helped redo one of the fences around it way back in the day, so some of that's been updated. So we actually have that cemetery. We don't have enough property there to actually do any more burials, but this one is quite spacious right now, so we should be set for a while now. I don't know you, but sometimes I used to do a lot of running at the Howell Cemetery because they had a lot of paths and stuff going through there. And I do enjoy looking at cemetery stones and just seeing the different styles and the names on it. You can see the Bergen family here is mentioned several times. And they used to do these very large monuments to families, and then they would put individual markers for the family members attached to these monuments right here. So you can see the Bergen family right there. There's quite a few Bergens here. The Rooney family. Yeah, if you want to go get one of these headstones today, these would be thousands and thousands of dollars to make. So they're, very impressive monuments right here. These would be some of the oldest cemetery stones that we have here. See, this is August 28th, 1870. So wow, this person would have lived through the Civil War. It says I think it says about 70 years old, so he would have been born in 1800. So he would have been alive when the country we didn't have the Louisiana Purchase at that point, folks. And he lived to see that the United States expand all the way to the West Coast and go through a Civil War. So that's incredible right there. And right here we have an outdoor mass space. There was a long time Father was doing masses outside here. And I don't know if he still does that occasionally too. I think maybe for the blessing of the animals he goes out here. But there's a spot here where you can do a mass here in the cemetery. But he doesn't do that very often. There's another headstone right there, an obelisk. It's kind of funny. If you go to Rome today, you'll see many obelisks that have like Christian crosses on the top. And if you know anything about your history, obelisk is an Egyptian religious item. It's actually a monument to the sun god Ra, because it's almost like a lightning rod of light from the sun, because Ra was the sun god. But as Catholicism works, we try to incorporate different people's cultures when we evangelize to different cultures. And so when we evangelize to the Egyptians, we use a lot of Egyptian artwork and Egyptian items to kind of find the Catholic elements in it. So you'll see a lot of obelisks in Rome, even today, that have been kind of usurped for a Christian purpose. And we have our weeping angel right here. If anyone of you guys watch Doctor Who, you know not to take your eyes off of this guy right here. I'm not sure if we have any Doctor Who fans here in Youth Group, but there you go. So I've been talking now for about 20-ish minutes between this, so I probably should let you guys go at this point. But that's your tour of the little church. After you watch it, we're going to hop back on Zoom, and you guys can tell me your questions that you might still have, what things I can still answer for you. I love talking history, especially about our little church here, because not a lot of people know a whole lot about it. They're used to our fancy new church across the street, but there's a lot of history here. I was impressed by the thought that, when people were going to church back in the day for a Sunday service, it wasn't easy as hopping in your car and just driving. You'd have to, be a long hike. You'd have to walk, take the horse, get up early. You'd have one mass, everyone would be together. It'd be a big deal to come up and get together as a community to do that. And I think it's a testament to people's faith at that time, what they'd have to go through to go and be a part of the mass. And I think it's a good reminder that, when we're going through this whole COVID crisis right now, the dedication that people have had to their faith in the past, and how this is a sacrifice for us, but we've come from people, a faith and a tradition that's really strong, and so we're not alone. Our people from our past know our sufferings and know what we're going through here. So this is just our our cross to bear at this time right now. So here you go, one final shot of the little church there for you. All right, guys, see you in a few minutes.